So we're excited to learn about bicycling. And he's currently on an adventure right now too. So he might talk about that just a little bit. So yeah, thank you for joining us, Matthew.
Well, good evening, everyone. So my name is Mathieu, and I come from Belgium. And until 2 months ago, I was living in Dundee in Scotland. So I've been interested in birds since I'm young, but it's really during COVID that birding really took off as a hobby. And during COVID, when things started to reopen slowly, the university was organizing fundraising campaign for Parkinson's disease. And the challenge that I set myself to raise some money was to cycle to the northernmost point of Scotland, and it was a success. I actually raised over 3,500 British pounds, so almost $4,000. And since I really liked the experience, I wanted to do it again to another kind of remarkable point in Scotland. So the easternmost point is simply a hangar in a fishing harbor, which was not a very nice place to be. The southernmost point is not the most beautiful either, but the westernmost point is a really intriguing place that I really wanted to reach. So to raise money for Parkinson's disease, so I set myself the challenge in June 2022 to cycle to Scotland's westernmost point. So next slide. Can somebody help? Yeah. So this is like a more anecdotal slide. So that's actually a rarity that I found in Scotland, so a red flanked blue tail. So a bird that you should see normally in Japan or in China at that time. So that's one that I saw just a little bit after the adventure, so that I wanted to share. So next. Next. So the trip consisted on setting foot on Scotland's westernmost point, which is called St. Kilda. So St. Kilda, that as you can see on the picture, is actually a rock sitting on the ocean. It used to be inhabited, but the island was eventually evacuated in 1921. People were surviving there eating seabirds like puffins or even fulmars, apparently a very fishy taste. Next. And so the other challenge that I set myself to accomplish was to see 145 bird species along the way, one for every 1,000 of people with Parkinson's disease in the UK. And at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation, you will see whether this number was reached or not. So that was the second challenge that I set myself. So next. And so this is actually an overview of the campaign that was raised. And to give you an idea, so the two professors on the right were actually my collaborators when I was working at the University of Dundee. So can go to the next. So what were the challenges? Well, as you know, in Scotland, the weather is always a challenge. So if you get something like 50 Fahrenheit, you would say it's hot. 70 Fahrenheit, it's like super hot. So the weather is unpredictable. You get the anger of the Atlantic with absolutely nothing in between. The second big challenge is the midges that you call in Florida no-see-em. They attack usually by millions when they do. And these bloodsuckers can really ruin your whole day if you were to be attacked. And I will show you in exclusivity a picture of one of them. So we can go to the next slide. So the plan to accomplish this, so I'm going to show you the map. So it's to cycle from Dundee to Glasgow first, which is the most populated part of Scotland. So it's called the Central Belt. So next slide. So this is the part of the itinerary that you can see in yellow. So you can see now that St. Kilda is actually the tiny rock on the ocean that you can see on the left. So this is the plan of the adventure. Next. Can go to the next slide. So the second part of the adventure will consist to reach actually the west coast from so cycling from Glasgow to Oban, and you can see that part of the trip in yellow. So quite a lovely place. I had never visited that part of Scotland before. So next. Can go to the next. So the next two parts of the adventures were cycling along the Outer Hebrides with a hope to take a boat to St. Kilda. And then the last stretch of the adventure consists of going back to Inverness, which is the place where I can take a train back to Dundee and finally rest at the end of the adventure. Next. So the first part of the adventure was done in 3 days, and actually surprisingly under an extremely auspicious weather. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you exactly the places that I'm going to visit. So I left Dundee, that you can see on the right of your screen. So first of all, I cycled along the River Tay, which is the largest river in Scotland, all the way to Perth, which is quite a big one, big city. So the wind was actually blowing in a rather favorable direction. Then I took the direction to Crieff, and I slept actually on one of these lakes in the mountains, a very beautiful view, as you will see. Then I went into the Trosach Nature Park that you can see on the left, and I slept in the city of Aberfoyle, the town of Aberfoyle. And then in the third day, I cycled again, this time against the wind, all the way to Glasgow, that is located at the bottom of your screen. Already with some nice birds along the way that I'm going to show you. Next slide. So Balgay Park is actually my backyard. And in Balgay, you can actually see a few nice birds already. So you've got all the burrowing pigeons, like the wood pigeon, the feral pigeon, but the one that I was looking at is the beautiful bird on the left. And when we press next, the name of it will appear. This is actually called a stock dove. It's a very beautiful pigeon that is very shy and very difficult to find in the trees. And the second bird that you can see on the right is called the Eurasian nuthatch. It's actually rare in Scotland. So it's actually colonizing Scotland. And for some time, it was the only spot in Scotland where you can see a nuthatch. And so in the next slide, I took a little stopover at my university to take a picture in front of the lab that you can see on the next slide. So this is the School of Life Sciences. So this is where I was working. So you can see the bicycle. I have all the equipment on the back, plus the backpack and also the tents. So the first stopover that I had was this little abandoned church, which is really beautiful. Next. And then I stopped for a bit of birding at the Errol Reed Beds, probably one of the best nature reserves in the area. And I'm going to show you some of the local inhabitants that you can find when you walk around the pond. Next. So when you press on next, the birds will appear one by one. And this one is by far the most elusive and the most interesting bird to find, which is called the bearded tits. It's a real specialist of the reed beds, and you can see them flying very low above the reed beds. So I managed to see them at the time that my grandfather was actually calling me to ask me how the adventure was going. The second one that you can see is called the reed warbler. It's actually surprisingly rare here, but when I was walking around, I managed to see one of them. So our European warblers are all brown and drab, and they can only be identified by sound. So this one in the reed bed was easy to identify. Next one. So this is actually not a fish dropped by an osprey, but this is called a reed bunting. And the reed bunting is actually close to the North American sparrows, and it can be seen singing from the top of the reeds. So the next bird that I'm going to show you is called a sedge warbler. So this one is recognizable because of its white eyebrow. and it's probably one of the most talkative birds that you can find on the reed beds. Next. So the grasshopper warbler is a very surprising bird, and the song actually sounds a little bit like the grasshopper sparrow that you have in North America. I was hoping to hear one, but unfortunately, I was listening carefully, but none of them could be heard at that time. So a little bit disappointed. So the next bird that I was also looking for was the marsh harrier. So this is actually a close cousin to the northern harrier that you have in North America. I know that there are 7 pairs that breed, but unfortunately, this time it was nowhere to be found. And so I left the reed bed without seeing the marsh harrier. So next. So this is another view of the pond when I was walking around it. So next. So this is actually an absolutely immense reed bed, as you can see. And at the very far back, this was the last glimpse of home because I live on one of the top of the hills that you can see on the left side. So that was the last time to see home in this whole adventure. Next. So I took a little stopover in Perth, and especially on this little island, I had a fish and chips. I was absolutely hungry. I was really starving. But I went to this island because there was one bird that I was really hoping to see. So press next. This is the common kingfisher that you find in Europe. And I was very fortunate to have actually 3 of them that flew just in front of me while eating my fish and chips. So quite lucky to see them. Next. So after leaving Perth, I got into some really deep Scottish countryside. And you can see we have lots of fishes, lots of sheep, sorry, and some forests. And it actually reminds me of some landscape that I saw just today or even yesterday in Wyoming or even in Montana. And while sighting in this place, if you press on next, one bird is going to appear. So I saw this curious creature that is actually very present in French literature and songs. This one is called a cuckoo, the common cuckoo. And this is one of the only cuckoos that actually does cuckoo when it sings. So it's a very shy bird. You don't frequently see it, but everyone in Europe knows the cuckoo. Next. So this is an overview of the landscape, and you can see the first hills. And in this part of the trip, I was very fortunate to see a bunch of birds of prey. So let me introduce you to some of the birds of prey that we have in Scotland. So next. So the first one that you see on the left with its forked tail is actually called a red kite. So the red kite can be easily distinguished from the one that you have in the middle, which is called a common buzzard. A buzzard is actually the UK word for hawks. And then the third one that you can see is called the European kestrel. So this one, when I was climbing a hill, I was going very slowly, so I really had time to stop and catch my breath to see this beautiful creature, the common kestrel, and even take a little picture of it. So these are the 3 raptors that you're very likely to see when you are visiting the Scottish countryside. So next. So you've got the names that are appearing. So while climbing the hill, that was the end of the day. You can see that the sun is getting closer and closer to the hills. I was looking for some small birds that live on these hills. So they're going to appear if you press on next. So if you find some grassy field with perches, the one that you're going to find is called the windchats. This beautiful insectivore is actually quite restricted in range in Scotland. That was actually the first time for me to see it in Scotland. So next. Its very close cousin is actually called a stone chat. The stone chat, because its call is like 2 stones hitting one another. And this one likes the gorse bushes. It likes to perch on top of the thorny bushes, especially as you can see on the right. You've got the male and you have the female. Very beautiful creatures, isn't it? And so the third one is called the wheatear, the northern wheatear. You've got the male on the left and a female on the right. So the wheatear, you will see it on grassy fields with stones. So this is where it's usually perches. Next. So this is where I decided to pitch my tent for the night. It was a very beautiful spot. This is actually a dam. And if you press on next, you will discover the birds that I came across. So this one is called the red grouse. It's a kind of grouse that you would find in North America. And this one has a very funny call. It says something like, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. I could easily hear it on the hills, even when I was having a rest in my tent. Next. This beauty is actually not a Scottish bird, but this is actually a rare American vagrant. This one, I guess everyone recognizes it. So this one is a ring-bill gull, and I took this picture on the dam on which I was sleeping. This bird actually has been spending all of its summer for the last 5 years at this precise dam and is a very regular visitor. So this one is the ring-bill gull. Next. So this is the view in the morning before I started. And I was actually quite lucky to see flying above the lake before starting an osprey. So you can press on next. However, the camera was not ready, so I just couldn't take a picture. Ospreys are actually not very common in Scotland. These two are actually house martins, very close cousins of the tree swallows. And this beautiful picture, they look like they're kissing each other. I don't really know what they were doing. Maybe exchanging some bugs. They were obviously feeding chicks. So next. So whiskey is a very famous thing in Scotland. So on the way down the hill, I was next to the Glenturret whiskey distillery. Next. So this is what the countryside looks like. And of course, there are always birds to find. So next. Next, yeah. So I stopped next to this river and I was looking for two particular inhabitants. This one looks very much like a spotted sandpiper, well, minus the spots. And this one is called the common sandpiper and is very frequently seen above, next to the river, in the rivers, especially when you have stones. So this one is the common sandpiper. And then if you press on next, the next bird that I was able to see was again the Eurasian nuthatch. So they can be seen at some very precise locations in central Scotland. And again, I managed to hear and to see one more along the way. Next. So under this bridge, there was one bird that I was absolutely looking for. I prepared the camera before I knew it was there. And then when I walked towards it, I managed to find it. And this one is the European dipper. This one has actually a white belly. This is the only picture I managed to get, and then it flew away. On the last adventure, it's a bird that I didn't manage to see, so I was really glad to count it among the birds of this adventure. Next. So this is one of the biggest lakes, or loch, as we call them in Scotland, called the Loch Earn. So it was a very hot summer day, probably 68 and a half, maybe 70 Fahrenheit, something like this. So I was sweating buckets. I was drinking gallons of water on such a day. And I'm going to show you the views that I had while cycling along this big loch. So next. So under these trees, you have some beautiful purple flowers. Next. And so this is actually along the way, the next big loch that I was cycling along, called the Loch Lubnaig. And then the third one, Loch Venachar, with some wooded hills. And I met actually a fellow cyclist also coming from Dundee. So he tried to weigh my bicycle. He was not able to lift it with his arms, and to lift his bicycle, just 2 fingers were enough. So, so yeah, sometimes cycling quite heavy. Next. So I then cycle along a very beautiful road on the mountains called the Duke's Pass. And of course, when you cycle on hills like this, there is always one bird looking at you from the sky, watching you, and even announcing your presence to everyone. If you press on next, it will discover it, it's of course the common raven. It's always there. It always tells everyone that there is somebody birding around. So next. So very beautiful landscape. So next. And so I pitched my tent in the forest. Actually, this is just next to the river that goes to Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, as you can see. Very quiet place, very lovely place to sleep. And so, intriguingly, the next morning, I just asked to refill my water bottle, and it turns out that the father of this woman installed a bunch of machines that actually I used in the lab in Dundee. So the world is very, very small. So had a very nice time, and I really want to thank them for the pancakes for my second breakfast with them. Thank you very much. So next slide. And so then the next destination was the Loch Lomond, which is one of the biggest lakes in Scotland and one of the most popular ones. So if you see the biggest summit slightly on the right, I actually climbed it with a friend 2 years earlier. So next. So yeah, again, some wind chats because you have some grassy fields with perches. Next. So whenever you see some lakes like this, especially in the north or even on the west, there's always one bird that you will see on the lake. So press on next. It's of course the red-throated loon. So these birds are very territorial, and you only have one maximum per lake. And this is actually the first one that I saw in the adventure. So red-throated loon always on these type of lakes. Next. So on the edge of the lake, I stopped because there was one bird that I wanted to find, especially in these old forests that's are just here on the edge of the lake. So press on next. So this one is called the garden warbler. As I told you, the warblers in Europe are drab. They're very hard to recognize unless they sing. And this one is drab, but sings beautifully. So now press on next. And the next bird that I was looking for is called the common redstart. So this has nothing to do with the American redstarts, but redstarts means simply red tail. So this one is a female, and I managed to hear as well a male that was singing around. So they're very uncommon in Scotland. They only breed at very specific locations with old forests. Next. So I went to visit the nature reserve at the bottom of the Loch Lomond, and I'm going to show you what bird made me happy before I left. So press on next. Yeah, next maybe. I can't see the bird coming yet. Yeah, so this is the osprey. So ospreys are actually breeding in Scotland, but they are actually rather uncommon, and their nests are protected. Also on the lake, you can find some common mergansers and even common mergansers and even red-breasted mergansers if you can find them. Next. So Glasgow is actually a very peculiar city, and if you go there, you must absolutely see this strange statue. So the cone is actually put back by someone every single day. It is removed every single day by the police. It's probably one of the most bizarre monuments in town. But when I was there, I was looking for actually a very rare bird. It was seen on a pond near the hospital. So I was starving, but I decided to make it a try to see it. So press on next. This is actually an American bird, the ring-necked duck. This is the individual that I photographed a couple of months earlier in Glasgow. But unfortunately, when I got there, it apparently took off and left the place just before I arrived. So I was a little bit disappointed that this time, unfortunately, I did not manage to see my ring-necked duck for the adventure. Next. So very disappointed not to find it. So now I'm going to talk to you about the west coast of Scotland. So again, the weather was great, as you will see, uh, probably like 60, 65 degrees. So next. So from Glasgow, I had to cross the Clyde, which is the river in Glasgow, in order to go to some rather remote countryside that I had never visited before. Press on next. And I met some nice cyclists. This guy, I've probably cycled like 5 miles with him, and he guided me outside Glasgow because it was a bit complicated. So next. So this statue represents the real weight of the bicycle, especially when you have headwinds like I had that day. So next. So I stopped at a very nice nature reserve called Loch Winnoch, and I'm going to show you some of the birds that I saw and some of the birds that I was really hoping to see. Where's the next? So the nature reserve has a big lake and also has some mud flats for shorebirds. So press on next. So the great crested grebe is probably one of the most amazing grebes out there, and they have a very interesting family life, and they actually nest on floating rafts. They're actually, like most grebes, they're unable to walk, and they can only take off and land on the water. Next. So this is the part with shorebirds, and I really had a lot of expectations. So press on next, and I'm going to show you what I was hoping to see. So this beautiful creature is called the northern lapwing. They're actually very common, and they're very easy to see. They breed actually there at the nature reserve. Press on next. So this one is actually the little ringed plover. It's actually a distant cousin of the semi-palmated plover. They nest here. There's only a single pair, but you need to be extremely patient if you want to see one. I was patient, but unfortunately, I did not manage to see it, even though it was seen there in the morning. So I was really hoping to see it, but unfortunately, it was not successful. Next. Next. So this was my first glimpse of the West Coast, and this is the boat that is going to bring me to the first island in Scotland. And in the next few slides, I'm going to introduce you to the cyclist that is just in front of me. Next. And so during the crossing to the Isle of Arran, there was quite a lot of things going on. So I'm going to show you what could be seen from the boat. Next. So we have some harbor porpoise that look like small dolphins. They're only like 5 feet long, and there were a bunch of them. They were actually following the boats all along the way from in the crossing. Next. So this one looks like the pigeon guillemots, and it's called the black guillemots, and they're very common in the north and also on the west of Scotland. But they're rare in Dundee. I would never see them on the opposite coast. Next. So these superb birds are called the gannets, and the gannets nest in colonies, especially on the west and also on the north of Scotland, and they're capable of diving to catch fish at the speed of a car on an interstate. So they're extremely fast birds, and seeing them diving is something that's absolutely amazing to see. So next. So this is the arrival in Arran, and surprisingly, there was absolutely no wind, as you can see. So the weather was still nice, although a little bit overcast. So next. So and this is the biggest village, as I may say, called Brodick. So next. So this friend is called Jérôme. He's from Belgium. And he is actually not a beginner, because a couple of years ago, he cycled from Belgium to Hong Kong. Yeah, it took him a year. And so he's the guy who motivated me to do cycling, to do cyclotourism. And so I invited him to join me on this adventure, and I was really glad that he accepted. And so for the next 10 days of the adventure, then we cycled together. And this was the first, and actually we didn't have many other beers in this adventure, but we had another one at the arrival. So cheers. Next. So we were looking for a nice place to sleep, and so we decided to go on the hills. And in fact, in Scotland, you can pitch your tent wherever you want, as long as you're not disturbing anyone. So we were a little bit picky, and we ended up finding an absolutely awesome place to pitch the tent. So next. So this is called Glen Sannox, and this was the view directly from the tent. So next. So this is the tent, but rapidly you will realize that there is actually an invisible enemy that is all around us and that caused us a lot of problems. So press on next. Yeah, so I managed to hear that very difficult warbler that makes the sound of a grasshopper sparrow. It was very far away. But then if you play the video, you will rapidly see what was actually inside my tent. So could you try to press on play? You start to see these little white spots. And these are the midges. These are the no-see-em. And when they get into your tent, you know your night is going to be a nightmare. The next day will be a nightmare. And the day after is also going to be a nightmare. And so if you press on next, I'm going to show you in exclusivity a picture that they took of one. And no, there's no Photoshop involved in this photo. So we had a little walk, but it was very quiet. So Glen actually means river in Scottish English. And so you can go to the next, because I think you went backwards. Next. Next. Yeah, so that's the landscape. So the next. So a big caterpillar. And so this is the boat that actually brought us back to the mainland. And so the weather cleared up and gave us some absolutely amazing landscapes, typical of the West Coast, like the hills going into the sea. So next. So we picked up a third member for our expedition. So Diane, she's from France. And we had actually one, so she cycled with us for one more day. So next. Shortly after, Jérôme had a puncture, 10 minutes, expert hands, and then the bicycle was repaired, and then we could go. So yeah, punctures do happen. I was lucky; I had 0 during this adventure. Next. So again, that's the view. So press on next. So this is one of the beautiful Scottish cows called the Highland cattle. And yes, we had over 70 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 71 or 72. It was really hot, and I believe that this cow was actually cooling down in the river. Next. So that was a nice castle ruins that we found along the way. Next. Some Scottish villages have an absolutely amazing name, as you can see. Marananoil, maybe. Next. And so again, some nice landscapes. But since it is June, then the birds tend to be more quiet because they're nesting, and they're quite busy incubating and also feeding their chicks. So a little bit more quiet here in terms of birding. So next. So we decided to stop at this beautiful beautiful place. You can see 2 of the main Scottish islands on the background, Islay and Jura, very famous for whiskey. Press on next. And we managed to see some otters. That was actually my first time to see otters. It looked a bit like seal in the distance, but then when you can see the little tail, then you know that they are otters. Didn't manage to photograph them. And this apparently, I thought it was a moth, but somebody told me that actually it is not a moth. So next. So this is where we spend the night, but we got again attacked by midges. So the night was not really good. So next. So very beautiful view in the evening. And it's from the next day that the weather is going to change, well, a little bit. So next. So this is the midge protection that Diane was wearing. And it was actually necessary, especially in the morning, because they started to attack us very early on. And next. And so I took this picture, but it looks like Jérôme is religiously sharing the bread between everyone. So next. And so after leaving Diane in the town of Open, then Jérôme, we took the ferry to the Outer Hebrides. So this is where the most important part of the adventure is going to take place. So next. So here the weather turned, you will discover very soon. So press on next. So we had like 6 hours of crossing towards the island of Barra, where the weather was still amazing. And then the weather went from amazing to bad, from bad to horrible. And then we had to take a break. And then when the weather was only bad, then we managed to keep going. And then only when we got to the north part of it, then the weather improved a little bit and the weather became good again, of course, at the arrival. So next. So the crossing was actually a nice place to do some sea watching from the boat. And I'm going to show you some of the birds that I managed to see during this crossing. So next. So next. Next. So this one is called the Great Skua. The Great Skua looks like a young seagull, but this is a real pirate. This one actually steals the food from others and also can tear the storm petrels in multiple parts to eat them one by one. Next. So there were quite a lot of auks. So this one is called the razorbill. And you had another one that you could see, which is called the common guillemot or common murre here in North America. And both of them could be seen in big numbers because they breed all around. So next. So if you continue to press on next, there are some other birds that I would like to show you. So yeah, this one actually, there were some dolphins, some common dolphins that you can find on the West Coast. This one is called the puffin and the Atlantic puffin. I managed to see one, especially when they're flying above the sea, they're very hard to pick up. So next. So this one is called the Manx shearwater, and we are just a couple of miles away from the largest colony in the UK. So this is the only place where you can see them breeding in huge numbers. This one looks a bit like the Audubon shearwater. So next. And this one is not my picture, but this one is called a storm petrel. And this is the only place where you can see them in daytime around the boat. Very difficult to photograph, but I still managed to see one or two during the crossing. So next. So this is actually the Scotland's westernmost point of the mainlands. And so this is where the adventure begins on the islands, on the Outer Hebrides. Next. So this is one of the largest villages, and this is called Castle Bay. And so just outside Castle Bay, so press on next, we were looking for a bird. So next, which is called the Arctic tern. So the Arctic tern is probably one of the most magic birds in terms of migration because they fly literally from the north to the South Pole. And they can be seen breeding here. And actually in Scotland, we are at the southernmost points of their range of breeding. So next. And so here, when we were cycling all around, we were looking for a bird that is very difficult to see. So next. And that we managed to find here in the tall grass. Unfortunately, from June, it's not possible to see it anymore because it's hiding very well. It's called the corncrake. So press on next. So the corncrake you can hear it. It does like a metallic sound that is like. And with Jerome, actually, we managed to find like a bunch of them. And this is the only place where you would find them in Scotland. They look a little bit like a king rail. So press on next. And so when we were cooking, we had actually a common loon that was drifting. So press on next. That was drifting behind us and eating, obviously, a delicious shrimp. So next. So we actually slept technically on an airport, but well, the Barra is the only airport in the world where the plane actually lands on the beach. So the runway is actually at the back of here. So we slept actually on the grass just at the edge of the runway. So next. That was the previous one. So next slide. So the runway is actually at the end, and we even saw the plane landing a little bit later. So next. So this is the landscape, and we then took the direction to southeast. So we had to take another ferry. So next. And this is when the weather started to turn a little bit sour. So next. So from these islands, the wind started to pick up. So next. And you can see that the cloud coverage is getting a bit more and more. And then next. And from here, I'm going to show you the weather on the pictograms. And the more the tougher the weather, then the fewer bird pictures you will see, because it's more and more difficult to stop birding. The wind was super intense and was pushing us backwards. Was actually pushing us forward. So next. And so this is when the weather became like the most difficult. So next. So next. And here you can see that it's getting darker and darker. And this is when the rain started. The wind was pushing us at almost 15 miles an hour on this road, which was really welcome. Next. So you can really see the grass, and that gives you just an overview of the shitty weather that we're getting into. Next. Next. This is probably the best way to illustrate the weather, and cycling into it was even more difficult. So next. So we had no choice, but we had to stop, and we had to find a place in a hostel, because it was absolutely impossible to pitch our tents. And also the boat trip to St. Kilda was cancelled because they just couldn't make it safely. So unfortunately, going to the westernmost points wouldn't be possible this adventure. But nevertheless, I have a good surprise to show you at the westernmost points of the islands. So next. So we had to spend 2 days inside, but when there was a little break in the storm, we decided to go to the beach, and we still managed to find some nice birds. So next. So dunlins in breeding plumage were quite a common sighting in these places. So next. Sanderlings also in breeding plumage. These are birds that you just don't see very often wearing these colors, especially in the south of Scotland. Next. So bank swallows, also known as San Martins in Europe, they were actually flying against the wind. So that means it was a lot more easy to take pictures of them because they just fly so fast. Next. And this one is called the common ring plover. It looks very much like a semi-palmated plover, and it would even be difficult to see the difference between the two. Next. So when the weather became a little bit better, we had absolutely no choice but just to leave and to keep going. So next. So we met this German hiker. She's only 20 years old, and what we are doing on the bicycle, she was doing it on foot. That was absolutely incredible. So we were really impressed by this very young woman and what she was doing. Next. So you can see on the left here, otters crossing. And then the wind had turned. So from tailwind, it now became side winds. And you can see that the weather was really, really difficult. Next. Next. So the weather is really testing our motivation. And even the cows were really wondering, what are these two cyclists doing? Next. Yeah, this is my friend. So there are very few pictures of me cycling, but I was doing exactly the same facing exactly the same difficulties. Next. So we decided to take a little break at the top of the house, at the top of the hill. And then I suddenly spotted a bird of prey with a white rump in the back, and then it disappeared. So with Jérôme, we decided to wait a little bit. But then when I told him to go, Jérôme told me, well, no, it's coming back, it's coming towards us. So quickly, I gave him my binoculars and then caught my camera. And what did we see? This is the male of the hen harrier. So the hen harrier looks very much like your northern harrier. And the male, it was my first time to see a male in his beautiful gray colors and with the black wingtips. And he crossed the road at a walking speed. And that was an absolutely awesome encounter. This is the type of things that motivates my friend and I to go further in such a shitty weather. So let's continue. This was the westernmost point of the adventure. You can see the rain on my glasses. I was not even motivated to go birding in these places. There were birds that I had never seen before. They were potentially there, but there was just no energy for birding at that time in such conditions. Next. So this place is normally good to catch some gulls, some rare gulls like the glaucous gull or some American shorebirds, but unfortunately we did not stop there. It was just so bad weather, so we had to continue and move on. Next. So along the path, we suddenly got a little surprise. Next. Suddenly a bird took off. And this bird rapidly was identified as being a short-eared owl. And again, same thing, I managed to give the binoculars to my friend and then take a few pictures of the bird in this very difficult light, and then the bird landed. And so that was a short-eared owl, and that was very nice. And this is the motivation that made us reach the final points of the day. So next. So this is a place where one of my friends actually spent a whole week, a couple of weeks earlier. And next. So just behind, I managed to find this curious looking seabird. And this one is actually an Arctic skua, also known as parasitic jaeger, following some terns here on the bay. Next. This is also a place where you can find little terns, very similar to your least terns that you can see in Florida. In fact, with Amy, we managed to see a colony of least terns that are very similar. Next. So again, we managed to find one of these corn crakes. So next, in these high grass, especially when you have these yellow flowers. The corn crake is the one that looks a bit like the king rye. Next. So here there is not much birding taking place, but I will just let you enjoy the landscape, always with the weather pictograms to give you an idea. So next. There was hardly any bird to be seen. They were just not moving a lot. So next. And so if you know a little bit Star Trek, the Borg, so I don't know why, but this village was just present all over the place. So next. So the Star Trek, they know that they should not be assimilated by the Borg. So this is the place where we decided to sleep for the night. And luckily the weather went a little bit better, allowing us to pitch our tents. So next. We even had a little bit of sunset, which was just the energy that we needed to keep going. So next. So now it was time to go back to the northernmost islands of the Hebrides. And again, that was the last big ferry trip between the islands. So next. So Harris. And Harris turned out to be one of the most difficult parts of the trip, especially because you will realize that it's beautiful, but it's super hilly, as you will see on the next few slides. So next. So this place is normally very good to see phalaropes, but we had a look and unfortunately there was no phalarope to be seen. In fact, there were very, very few shorebirds. So next. Again, this very long beach. In winter, it should be full of shorebirds, but they're just further north or even inland. So very few shorebirds to be seen. Next. Next. Very beautiful landscape, as you will see. The weather is absolutely unforgiving. So I'll let you enjoy the landscape. So next. So these are the hills, and we need to get through that the same day. So next. Next. And so all of a sudden, our weather app showed us that there was a big weather cell approaching. So we had to find a shelter because we would be completely wet. And so next, the only place where you could find a shelter was under the truck. And we spent probably half an hour under a big shower under the truck. The temperature was around probably 50 Fahrenheit, something like this. But this is Scottish summer, as you can see. Next. Then it was time to venture on the hills. Next. So it really looks like the moon. Next. Next. We had actually a very strong, very surprising encounter with a sheep that has 3 horns that you could briefly see. And so along the way, we had a nice surprise. So press on next. Next. I'll just let you see the landscape. Next. 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 And yeah, we got actually a little bit surprised to see that there were still some trees standing there because the weather is just so unforgiving. We were looking for birds of prey around the lake, but unfortunately there was none to be seen. So next. However, when we were approaching the only town of these islands, then suddenly I told Jérôme that there was a big brown shape on the side of the road. So we stopped. So next. And so that was actually a golden eagle. Unfortunately, I was so busy trying to identify it that I didn't manage to take a picture of it. But I managed to see the 6 fingers and also the long tail that are the giveaway characteristics for a golden eagle. And yeah, we do have golden eagles. They're rare. They're threatened in Scotland. And then when we came back to the bicycle to discuss about how successful it was to see a golden eagle, then I told him, hey, look, there are 2 more. And then when I took the picture in the distance, this is actually not a golden eagle that we found, but these are actually the white-tailed eagle. This is actually the cousin of the bald eagle. And the one that you see on the top is actually a 3rd calendar year. It's only the last year that it would get its white tail. And the second one was actually a juvenile. So this one is the 1st calendar year. And so that means that on this last day, we managed to see the 2 eagle species in just a matter of 5 minutes. Well, that was just enough energy for us to keep going that day. Next. So that was actually a 60-mile day, and we were absolutely shattered, as you can see on our eyes, especially his eyes, as you can see. So next. So the next day we were just completely shattered. So we decided to visit a little bit Stornoway, which is the capital of the Hebrides. we visited the castle, of course, looking for an Iceland gull or glaucous gull, but there is none to be seen in the harbor. So next. So this is the castle. So next. So next. And then it was already time to take the ferry back to the mainland to Ullapool. So the weather was absolutely bad, and the only bird that I saw was a single gannet. So next. So on the way back, we arrived in we arrived in Ullapool, which is a really beautiful place that would actually remind you of Norway and the fjords. And then we had to cross some really remote landscape, and I can tell you this is as remote as Idaho or even Wyoming. You will see the pictures. There is nobody living basically between the beginning and then the arrival. So next. So we stopped to refuel, and this is actually the best food truck in the whole United Kingdom, and it was absolutely amazing. I had some sea trout that was actually caught just in the river next to us. The next. So this is the view of the sea loch, and in fact, June is a very quiet time, and you see fewer and fewer birds because they're all busy breeding. So next. So I let you see the views. So next. And so this is when we got into some more remote places. So next. So when we decided to take a little break, we managed to see this head with these antlers protruding. And this is actually the red deer. And in fact, in Scotland, there are too many deers and there's not enough space in the forest. So it's actually very common to see deers roaming like this in the open. It's something that you would never see in any other mainland European country. So next. So this is one of the most remote places in Scotland. And so we decided to look for a place to sleep. So next. So you see the landscape is really nice. So we had quite a lot of choices. And then we decided to sleep along this big lake. And we started to hear some birds calling. And so press on next. And so the bird that we actually saw is this one. It's called the common sandpiper. It's a very close cousin of your spotted sandpiper. It also bobs its tail just the same way. And the common sandpiper breeds in the uplands, so in altitude, and especially along rivers or even inland lakes like this one. It's a really beautiful bird. Next. And so this is the place that we decided that we choose to pitch our tent for the last day of the adventure. Next. 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 And this was like the last descent towards these falls. And we managed to see another dipper on the rocks somewhere here. Let's press on next. And then once we got out of the mountains, we got into some agricultural places. And just when we looked at the sky, there was one bird of prey that we could see absolutely all over the place. Next. This is again our beloved red kites. So the red kite was actually almost exterminated, especially by landowners for probably bad reasons for hunting. And it got reintroduced, especially at this place called Black Isle near Inverness. And this is one of the best places to see them in Scotland. In Belgium, it's a bird that you would see probably a couple of times a week. They're actually very common in my home region. So next. And then we reached Inverness, and this is the bridge that brought us to the arrival line in Inverness. And if you continue on the right here, you will end up at the Loch Ness, the famous lake that pretendedly contains a monster in Scotland. I have never seen the Loch Ness Monster, so I don't know if it exists, but maybe you need to go to Scotland to see by yourself. Next. And Jérôme made a donation of his bicycle, and he went back to Belgium by train, and they offered us 2 beers to celebrate the arrival of our journey. And you can see our eyes, we were absolutely shattered. The weather that we had to cross was really unforgiving, and we could finally celebrate. So press on next. And then I took the train back home, and then I could finally rest. And that was the end of the adventure. And so I can tell you that I reached 133 birds. So it's actually quite difficult to get all of them, to get 145, because with a bicycle, you can't really cover long distances to see maybe a vagrant, or you need to be mindful of your energy, of your time, of the weather conditions, and they kind of limited our possibilities quite a lot in the Outer Hebrides when we were in the islands. But still, I would say that the journey was successful, and over $1,500 were collected for Parkinson's disease. And so next. There are quite a few people that I would like to thank. So my family and friends for supporting me during the adventure. Jérôme and Diane, the 2 cyclists. Everyone who refilled my water bottle day after day. All the people that I met along the way. Inverness Cycling Cafe for the arrival beers. The Ben Becula Hostel for accommodating us in the middle of the storm. And all the people who let us pitch our tents on their property. And you can actually forget the Just Giving page. It doesn't exist anymore. But if you liked the content, you will find some more pictures on Instagram. So this is my Instagram account, but I will send everything, all the links to Kathy, and then she will maybe circulate them in the newsletter. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very nice.
Yeah. So I'm going to open the chats because there were a few questions. So,
Oops. Yes, a lot of compliments. And Alan wanted to know, did you stop biking every time you heard a bird or spotted flying birds?
well, most of the time, these birds would be familiar to me. So basically, as you can see here, if you can see my video, you can see that I'm wearing here, this is my birding hat. So this is the best birding hat you can possibly imagine, because I get protection from the sun. I can also cover my ears if it's cold, and my helmet fits on top of it. So when the weather is good, I can actually open the air flaps, and then I would be listening constantly. So most of the birds would actually be common, or actually would be some that I have seen before that I recognize. So I would recognize them, but I only stop if they are like interesting. Or sometimes I just take a little break because I need to eat something, and then if it is worth it, then I would probably stop. I would probably get my camera and take some pictures. So it really depends. But most of these birds are actually, I only had like 1 or 2 lifers in this adventure.
Which birds were your lifers?
The corncrake. So the one that I didn't manage to see, but I managed to hear it very distinctly singing. I had 8 individuals during the whole adventure. It's reported to be rare. They ask people to report their sightings when you see them. They're hidden on eBird because they're sensitive species. But in fact, when you cycle, they're very easy to find. And also the storm petrel, the storm petrel is not a lifer. I had seen one the month before. So I think I had 1 lifer that I can remember.
Very good. Carol wanted to say, what a journey. Amazing. Lori said, what an experience. Thank you for sharing. Kathy said, thank you for sharing this amazing journey. I said, beautiful scenery. And Kathy said, did you find any defense against the midges?
Yes, so there is actually a spray which is called Smidge, which is the best midge repellent. It probably reduces the attacks from, let's say, 1 million at a time to 100,000 midges at a time. So helps, but still they still attack you where there is no smidge on your skin. So, but in fact, when the temperature drops below 40, below 50 Fahrenheit, then the midges go to bed. When you have wind, the midges go to bed. So that's what you need to be hoping for when you are in midges territory.
And Alan wants to know, what kind of camera do you carry?
Well, at that time, I had a 7D Mark II and a Sigma lens 150 to 600. However, now I have a different kit. I have an R10 with a 100 to 400 RF. And this is the gear that I definitely would prefer if I had to do this adventure again, because it's much lighter. The camera body is 1 pound and the lens is 1 pound. So it's half of the weight, and it's also much smaller. So that's what I would recommend for cyclobirding. Problem is that this kit is not weather sealed, so you would not be able to withstand too much rain. So that's the drawback of this kit.
Now, how cold? I noticed the walls were pretty thick in some of those houses. How cold does it get there in the winter?
Winter, between 35 and 40 Fahrenheit. It doesn't get cold because we have the Gulf Stream. In fact, in Scotland, it's never hot, it's never cold. In winter, you get between 32. It rarely goes below 32 Fahrenheit, especially next to the sea. So you would get between 35 and 45, maybe. And then you would get between 50 and 60 in summer, 70 like on the very good days.
But it is wet.
It's very, very wet.
And wet. Okay, and Carol said, just as a matter of perspective, it was 95 degrees here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I was birding in Senegal and Gambia in May, actually, in early May, and I had 115 Fahrenheit. I drank 1.5 gallons of water, and I walked that day. Actually, I walked probably 8 or 9 miles in the middle of the day. So yeah, that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. She said you win.
Yeah, we had some cold weather here in Wyoming, and it's going to be cold also in Montana today. So probably like Scotland, like Scottish spring, just the same weather.
Very good. Any other questions?
Great trip.
Yeah, that was a great trip. Except for maybe the rainy part.
But definitely, I encourage anyone to actually visit Scotland if you can. The ideal is in May, because this is when the songbird activity is the highest. This is when the migration is the best, and this is when it's probably the driest. May and early June are quite nice. Well, you can still get a storm, but normally it should be fine. And go to see whiskey distilleries, mountains, lakes, castles. There's so much to see, and the seabirds are absolutely fantastic. And birding is always best in Scotland along the sea, and also the specialties are on the mountains. So I'm going to send a message to Kathy with all the links. So you can actually, I will send you a link. If you click on it, you will be able to see all the trip, all the pictures, all the adventures. I will send you that link. And I will also send my email address. So if you want to come and visit Scotland, if I'm still there, I'll be happy to welcome you. And if you want some advice, because I'm not there anymore, I'll still be glad to help you if you're interested.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much. What an incredible adventure. This is from Carol. Congratulations on your fundraising.
Thank you very much. So that's a couple of thousands of dollars, and they go directly invested into the research that we were doing in the lab.
Very good.
All right. Well,